Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Fran Wagner, president of the League of Women Voters of Kentucky. We're here to share the findings and recommendations from our updated report on felony disenfranchisement in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Since 2006, the League of Women Voters of Kentucky has issued these reports to communicate to policymakers and Kentuckians the state of disenfranchisement in Kentucky and our place in the nation. It's not surprising the League has a history of advocating for the right to vote. Women struggled for decades to win that right. The League's core value is that voting is the central expression of citizenship, and every citizen of our Commonwealth should be protected in the right to vote. So it's my pleasure to introduce now Ed Monahan, who chairs the League's Felony Disenfranchisement Committee and will report on the findings and recommendations of this most recent report. Ed.
Thank you, Fran. And the good news is, as a result of the December 2019 executive order, over 178,000 more Kentuckians are now eligible to register and to vote. This is very significant progress over the last year. This chart shows a breakdown of the number of people who are disenfranchised in Kentucky by race. The royal blue column shows that almost 198,000 people who have lost their rights to vote, even though we have this good progress. There are fewer African Americans that have lost their voting rights, nearly 39,000, and nearly 3,500 Latinx people. But the data does not tell the whole story. As you're probably aware, the population in Kentucky is largely white, so you would expect the absolute numbers to be higher. But when you look at the percentage of people affected based on race, you see a dramatic discrepancy. African Americans are disproportionately affected. If people were treated equally regardless of race, you would see that the rate of disenfranchisement would be similar among groups. However, as this graph shows, African Americans are disenfranchised at over 2.5 times the rate of the general population. Also, you will see the percentage of Latinx are also disenfranchised at a slightly higher rate as well. Showing these graphs side by side, this is a quick review. The graph on the left shows us the number of people who are disenfranchised, while the graph on the right is showing us the percentage of people disenfranchised, broken down by race, which accounts for the differences in the population of people in different races that live in the state. If there were equity, on the graph on the right, you would see bars of equal height. If this issue affected all races equally, you would see the bars equal on the right. This graphically shows the disproportionate effect on African Americans. Despite the progress as a result of the executive order, an enormous number of people, nearly 198,000 or 5.92% of Kentucky voting age population, remain disenfranchised because of a felony conviction. This is the fourth highest overall rate of disenfranchisement in the nation. To place this in context, this number of disenfranchised citizens is greater than the population of every county in Kentucky except two, Jefferson and Fayette. And despite the progress brought about by the executive order, there are more people disenfranchised in 2021 than in 2006.
Good morning, and thank you, Ed, for that great introduction, and to the League of Women Voters of Kentucky for including me in this conversation. My name is Nicole Porter. I'm Director of Advocacy with the Sentencing Project, which is a national research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. We've been around since the mid-'80s and track many issues related to mass incarceration and collateral consequences, including the loss of voting rights for justice-involved residents. Kentucky is among the most restrictive states in the country, and the legislation that we've come to discuss this morning in support of the launch of this national report will help address the underlying policy despite the governor's leadership in restoring voting rights in recent years. Most glaring is the persistent reality of felony disenfranchisement despite that executive action. We've already heard an overview of the data in Kentucky and the impact on communities of color in particular. And as I've said, the state is in fact among the most extreme in denying voting rights that imposed access to the franchise have for justice-involved residents post-sentence after they've completed their prison term or term under community supervision. In addition to those living in the community, continuing to ban voting for people living in the community under supervision on felony probation and parole. This reinforces that Kentucky is among the most restrictive states, the most 3 restrictive states that do not automatically restore access to the franchise. In addition to Kentucky being amongst the most 3 restrictive states, given the racial disparity that Ed just highlighted, Kentucky is also among 7 states where 1 in 7 African-American citizens of voting age are disenfranchised nationally. That's twice the national average for Black residents. Even with the governor's executive order, Kentucky has enacted limited voting rights expansions in recent years, and yet there's still quite a few tens of thousands of residents who are disenfranchised. And in spite of that executive action, the expansion of rights in other states with lifetime voting bans exceeded the expansion of rights in Kentucky. For example, in 2018, with the adoption of the ballot measure Amendment 4 in Florida, up to 1.4 million residents got their voting rights back, even with the voting restrictions associated with fines and fees, obligations. Still, tens of thousands of residents in that state received their voting rights. And Virginia restored voting rights to over 195,000 residents through individual rights restoration authorized by several governors in that state over the last few years. So now is the time for Kentucky to do more in the effort to change the state's constitution and expand rights is one step in that direction. It's beyond time for the voting rights ban to change. This country is marked by different groups seeking their full rights as citizens. That history is celebrated and acknowledged from Black men seeking the franchise during the Reconstruction era to women seeking the franchise more than 100 years ago with the passage of the 19th Amendment. And now the voting ban for justice-involved residents must also be undone. And now is the time for Kentucky to do that. So, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for including me in this conversation, and just also say that Kentucky is among several states this year that are also considering efforts to expand the franchise. Earlier this week, I've been engaged in conversations from Maryland to Oregon. So hopefully this year, Kentucky lawmakers will get this done and include Kentucky in a category of states that are continuing to perfect this nation's democracy. So thank you so much.
We have 2 lawmakers with us today, Representative Nemes and Stevenson, and they will talk about House Bill 232.
Representative Stevenson, why don't you lead off if you'd like to?
No, Jason, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So there's not much more that I can say. This is an issue that I've cared about for a long time, since well before I ran for office. Last year, the Senate had a pretty decent bill that started us off, and then in the committee, we swung for the fences and got everything we had asked for, which is immediate restoration. And then we also had, to John Blanton's suggestion, getting all the rest of the civil rights back after 5 years, voting immediate and all the other civil rights back after 5 years, which we weren't even really discussing. And so I thought that was a very beneficial thing that Representative Stevenson and I put in our bill this year. And so I won't repeat what everybody has said. I'll just say, for me, from my perspective, everything that's said is right on point. The most important thing to me, though, is I ran for office to improve economic development and to strengthen the Kentucky family, which is broken in so many ways. My own family was broken growing up, and that doesn't, it's beautiful families all over the place, but wanted to make sure that we try to strengthen our families and let people have happiness and let people have be all that they can be. And one main thing about that, even though it may not be empirically studyable, although it probably is the dignity of the individual, right? I want people to come back into the fold. I want them to feel that they're part of us because they are part of us. And when we say you're part of us, but you can't vote, we don't trust you to do that. You're not good enough to select who gets to govern you and us. Then you're other, and I don't want them to be other. I want them to come back into the fold, and I want them to continue to fight with us and improve in our society. And so that's the most important thing for me, is to restore the dignity of the individual, so then we can restore the dignity of our community as a group, and then we can go forth together. Because it's not enough to say you're out of jail, come on back to your communities. That's not enough, because that person, they feel it, the scarlet letter, they feel it. And I want them not to feel that. I want them to come back and feel they have obligations, responsibilities, duties, just like that we have, the rest of us have. They need to have that. They need to feel that. And so I've talked to a number of people who've lost their rights to vote. And you think, oh, it's just a small thing. It's a right to vote, one of millions, right? No big deal. It matters to these folks. I have a brother-in-law who can't vote because he made mistakes decades ago. And so it's not fair to rob my brother-in-law. It's not fair to me that he can't vote. It's not fair to all of us. And so for me, it's about the dignity of the individual and the dignity of our communities. And so we're going to fight for this. We're going to try to get on the ballot in November of 22 and let the people decide. And I'm confident that the people will vote the right way. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Representative Nemes. Representative Stevenson.
I just want to add briefly. First of all, thanks to Representative Nemes for starting this and keeping it going and inviting me to be a part of that which will make Kentucky great. Like, our whole system is based on an engaged citizen. And our whole legal system is based on people paying for the crimes they committed. And once they've paid that price, it is incumbent upon us to allow them to rejoin and give back to the community. Voting is what makes this country great. Voting is what makes this state great, so that we can come together and move Kentucky from the bottom of so many lists to the top. Means that Kentucky families are thriving. And that's all we want, for every family to thrive. And this bill goes in that direction, so that no one feels like an outcast. No one feels like they've been unfairly punished, because they've served their sentence and now they can contribute to the community. So thank you all for pushing this. Thank you for the data. And thank you, Rep. Nemes, for making sure that this is going to be on before the legislators to get before the voters.
Ed, can I say one more thing?
Please.
I made a mistake. You know, Representative Stevens and I, we're standing on other people's shoulders. Obviously, we filed this bill, and it'll be bad if I didn't say that, you know, Representative George Brown and Representative Booker have been fighting for it in the last couple of years, and then before that, Daryl Owens. So we need to make sure that, you know, this has been a long fight, and we're really close. So I wanted to mention those gentlemen and their fight for this effort as well.
And
Yeah.
also Jesse Crenshaw.
Way before my time.
We hope the representatives will be able to stay on the call to answer questions from the media at the end.
Hey everyone, I'm Josh Douglas. I teach at the University of Kentucky Law School, and I focus on election law and voting rights. And I've had the privilege of being in many conversations with various leaders in the state, including Representative Nemes and Secretary of State Adams. And one thing I'm really proud about with respect to Kentucky is that, by and large, the people in the state are dedicated to democracy at a time in which our democracy is under attack from many different directions. I can say with confidence that for the most part, when you see the actions that representatives, that the leaders are taking, you can see a dedication to democracy. And this bill is part and parcel of that, because the right to vote is the most important aspect of our democracy. The Declaration of Independence says that a democracy is legitimate based on the consent of the governed. And shouldn't that include all of us? Shouldn't that include everyone? Just because you committed a crime and made a mistake years ago, that doesn't mean that you're not part of our society, that you're not part of our democracy. We don't take away your citizenship after you've served your time. Why are we taking away your right to vote? Of course, felon disenfranchisement historically across the country has a history that derives from discrimination, and of course we see the effects of that as well to this very day. And what does it mean for having a robust right to vote? It means that our democracy is as legitimate as it can be, because we have the consent of the governed. As the slides say, there's a personal toll, as Representative Nemes mentioned, for every individual who has been denied the right to vote. There's also a personal benefit, and there's a benefit not only for individuals, but for society at large. A former student of mine did a really fascinating study in which he looked at states' recidivism rates, that is the rate at which people recommit crimes, commit a second crime, and compared that with the state's felon disenfranchisement laws. And what he found is that the states with the most lenient re-enfranchisement policies had the lowest recidivism rates, that is the lowest amount of people committing crimes. Now, a second crime. Now, we can't prove causation. We can't prove that re-enfranchising individuals leads to less crime, but there's a very clear correlation between the two. And I think this suggests, at least, that there's evidence of societal benefits, not only on democracy, but on reintegrating people back into society. So I fully support this measure. I think it's great that it is a bipartisan push in the legislature, which honestly, all of our election laws should be. We shouldn't be thinking about election laws in terms of the R's and the D's. We should be thinking about them in terms of reforming our democracy and making it stronger. And that's exactly what this bill does.
Good morning. I'm Marcus Ray, the NAACP Kentucky State Conference President. I'm honored and excited to be here today with our partners to release the League of Women Voters update on felony disenfranchisement. 150 years later, felony disenfranchisement is still the greatest voter suppression tool that was ever devised. When implemented in 1865, it was designed to only affect the former slaves in order to sidestep the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. This gave the formerly enslaved people citizenship. And with the citizenship, men had the right to vote unless convicted of a crime. As poll taxes, literacy tests, and property ownership were eliminated as barriers to the African-American voting, felony disenfranchisement remained the ace in the hole. In Kentucky today, 1 in 7 African-Americans of voting age cannot vote. That may not seem like a lot until we unpack what 1 in 7 looks like. 38,665, or 15.1% of African Americans in Kentucky continue to be denied access to the vote in American democracy. It's frustrating to know that Kentucky's rate of disenfranchisement for African Americans is 2.5 times higher than the 6.2% national average. However, there is relief on the horizon in the form of House Bill 232, and the Kentucky State Conference supports House Bill 232 without amendments and looks for its passage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Foster. I'm stepping in for Veronica Cunningham this morning. We're with the American Probation and Parole Association, which is the nation's largest professional association for probation, parole, and pretrial officers. We're actually based here in Kentucky, so this is an issue that's very near and dear to our hearts. I want to thank all the previous speakers for covering the topic today so comprehensively and giving us both the history, but also the current state of voter disenfranchisement in Kentucky and in the US at large. APPA, as of 2007, has officially endorsed the full restoration of voting rights upon completion of an individual's prison sentence. And generally, we also generally feel that voting rights should not be taken away for anyone who's on community supervision at any point in time. With that, we heartily support the passage of HB 232. We think it's a fantastic step forward and wish you all the best of luck in passing it this year.
Hello, my name is Marcus Jackson, the Smart Justice Organizing Coordinator for the ACLU of Kentucky. My last arrest was December 1st, 2007, a nonviolent offense over 13 years ago, and I cannot vote. For me, being denied the right to vote is frustrating and traumatic. Frustrating in that I am a husband, father, son, brother, and more than my past. For me, my criminal activity was a desperate attempt to resolve an issue I knew no other way of resolving. Traumatic in that I did not commit the offenses that placed my life within the revolving doors of incarceration. And no matter my efforts, there does not appear to be a path forward. How do we expect returning citizens to be productive without the ability to engage as productive citizens? I personally do not believe in anyone should be denied the right to vote or face waiting periods before full restoration of rights. However, House Bill 232 is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Hall, and I am a policy strategist at the ACLU of Kentucky. I'm here today to support this bill and all the folks that are behind it and the great work they have done. I was also disenfranchised. I received a felony conviction after years with struggling with substance use disorder. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I know y'all probably couldn't guess it, but so you know, voting was a big part of my life growing up. My mother really instilled it in me young, and I remember sitting in prison and thinking that this is my consequences. You know, this is my consequences. When I get out, it will be better. And I remember getting out and losing that right to vote. I'm also a mother, and I knew what the influence of my vote has on my children and my family, and to try to describe the helplessness of not having a voice for yourself and your children. It's hard to put into words. So I sat years without being able to cast my ballot, and eventually did get my rights restored via, you know, the restoration of civil rights form. But even that, I sat and waited 2 years to have an answer. And still yet, my fiance can't vote. And just the last election, I had to explain to a 9-year-old why his daddy couldn't vote, because I take my kids to vote with me. And we had this long talk about, you know, well, Amanda, everyone makes mistakes. Aren't we supposed to forgive people? Why can't my daddy be forgiven? So this bill means so much to us at the ACLU as an organization, but it means even more to folks like me and Marcus and some of my coworkers who have been directly impacted and knows what this means. So we're here today to wholeheartedly support this effort. You know, we don't think anyone should lose the right to vote. And we're very proud of the work that's been done. And so we're excited to see where this may go.
The time is now for a constitutional amendment to be placed on the ballot to let people vote on whether they want this to become a permanent change in the Constitution, and House Bill 232 would do that. The League strongly supports House Bill 232 without amendment. The League's report has been released today. It's available on the League's website for downloading and viewing. We hope you will download it and pass it on. A copy of the report is being provided to each legislator, and we're now available, opening it up to questions.
So we have a question from Christopher Kenning for the legislators. Why does the bill have no exemptions for violent crimes?
Representative Nemes and Stevenson, would you like to address that?
Yeah, this is Representative Stevenson. The process for forming this bill, going all the way from Charles Booker and Darrell Owens to now, it's been years in the making. And so we had to come up with a bill that had the greatest chance of passing. And there's some very strong feelings about violent crimes. So getting your foot in the door and making sure that the crimes that are covered, it happens as soon as you complete whatever parole and probation responsibilities you have, we've gotten further than we've ever gotten before.
Representative Nemes?
That's exactly right. The only exception I want in there is someone who was committed a felony related to voting fraud, stealing an election. But we're trying to get as much as we possibly can get, with the understanding that we want to, we want to pass something. We want to get something on the books and get it to the people and amend our Constitution. So any limitations at all are except for the election fraud thing for me they give me a lot of problems, but we're trying to get the best thing we can pass. And the trade-off was to make it immediate. So that's the answer to the question. That's not perfect, but they always say making legislation and making sausage, you don't want to see it done. This is part of the sausage making process. It's not ideal. It's not perfect. Another thing that I don't think is perfect is the restoring of the rest of the civil rights. I'd like for them to be immediate as well, but we're getting as much as we can get. And please note, we're pushing pretty hard. The Senate's version was good, but it wasn't this. Senator Higdon did a great job, but we pushed it even further, and he's now in agreement with it. But that's the reason. It's just it's just power politics and what we can get accomplished.
Other questions?
This question is submitted by Lawrence Smith for Representative Nemes. As Representative Nemes mentioned, this has been considered for years. Why does he think that this year is different?
Well, we blame a lot on COVID, but let me suggest that this was a COVID casualty. Right before COVID, I think it was the week before, it had already passed the Senate, their version, and then we came over to the House committee, and it was a really uplifting way to see legislation passed. The Democrat leader, Joni Jenkins, and I talked, and we thought we could improve this. We got Senator Higdon to agree that let's let the process go forward, and he would not oppose any of our efforts. He just wanted to keep moving. And so we were about to vote, and Joni Jenkins made a motion to hold it for a day. And Chairman Bratcher allowed that. We held it for a day. We all huddled with ACLU and other groups and came up with the language that we have here, and brought it back the next day, and it passed. I think it was unanimous. And we're talking, I'm pretty sure it was unanimous. Amanda, you're shaking your head, nodding your head. So it was unanimous. And John Blanton, who is someone who was a retired Kentucky State Police trooper, who he was even started advocating for it. So it was really uplifting. We were whipping votes on the House floor, and we have the overwhelming number of votes on the House floor. And Senator Higdon thought he could get it past the Senate, and so we felt comfortable that we were going to get it done last year. Then all of a sudden, March 6th hit, and we know what happened from there. We felt good about it last year, and I feel good about it this year. The potential barrier that we're going to have to overcome is I don't really think the policy anymore. I think we've got the votes on the policy, although we don't need to give up. We need to keep pushing, get as many votes as we can, leave no vote on the field, so to speak. But we can only have so many constitutional amendments. And I don't know that there's been any decisions on what those constitutional amendments will be. So we need to make sure that we keep pushing, because we don't only have to get the policy agreed on, we have to be one of the few constitutional amendments that go forward. And so that's one of the barriers that we may run up against, that I'm trying to get out in front of.
So Dee Pregliasco asked, besides voter fraud, is treason also left out?
I'm looking. I don't know the answer. I'm looking for it right now. I don't remember that it.
Treason is currently in the current wording of the Constitution, so it is excluded.
Thank you, Ed.
Are there any other questions?
Jennifer, if I could add something about violent crime, and I think it's important for the media and other stakeholders on the call to recognize that people with violent offenses who've completed their sentence are expected to do a range of activity in order to be good neighbors that contributes to reductions in recidivism, include pay taxes and not reoffend, and voting is a part of a range of pro-social behavior and activity that can help public safety and include people fully in the community with the goal towards keeping everybody safe. And as Professor Douglas shared earlier, states with the most expansive voting rights laws have lower rates of recidivism. There are direct connections there, even though he reinforced that we can't assert causation. So I just think in questions around violent crime, in addition to sort of trade-offs for, what might get adopted politically, there is the goal around public safety that's very important to center in these discussions around ending these voting rights bans.
So House Bill 232 is only adds election fraud to what already exists in the Constitution that has treason in there also. So it's very important to the League that the legislation it supports has automatic restoration for all other persons who have committed a felony without any other exclusions. Are there other questions, Jen? As she's looking, the League is now going to work to provide this report to each legislator, and we're going to encourage people to ask their legislator to co-sponsor this bill and support it without amendments. If Jen doesn't have any other questions, we appreciate those that have presented today, lending their voice, their position, their moral authority to this important issue in Kentucky. It's one of the most significant civil rights issues that exist in this state. And we appreciate the leadership of Representative Nemes and Stevenson in working hard this year to get this bill over the finish line. So thank you to all that were on the call today.